Japanese Fairy Tale Series Number 18. The Ogres ARM. Told in English by Kate James. Kobunsha Publisher and Moriyarcho, Tokyo. All rights reserved. Published by T. Hasegawa. 17 Kami Nejushi, Tokyo. The Ogre's Arm. Long, long ago, there dwelt in a mountain called Oyama a race of fierce ogres. The chief of these ogres was named Shutendoji, and he and his followers came down from time to time upon the city of Kyoto, causing great terror, and working much mischief. Entering in at the great gate called Rashomon, they robbed and killed all that came in their way, both men and women. Now, in those days, there dwelt Minamoto no Reiko. This Reiko had 4 followers, the most daring of whom was named Suna. These 4 lowers were known far and near as Reiko's guard. In time of war they fought side by side, and in the intervals of peace they lived together in Baiko's castle. It happened one dark and stormy night, during one of those brief intervals, that the 4 warriors were gathered round the charcoal fire, telling stories of war and adventure, and so whiling away the time as best they might. What dull times these are! At last said Suna. Is there no news, no hope of any fighting? I hate this quiet life. News there is, answered another of the knights, who had just come into the room. The ogres have begun their old tricks again. The ogres! Exclaimed the knights, in awestruck and terrified voices. But Suna laughed long and loud. Do you really believe such old wives' stories? Cried he. His companions made no reply, but shook their heads with sad and downcast looks. With sad and downcast looks. At last, he who had brought the news looked up and said, Suna, since you are so sure that there are no such creatures as ogres, will you go to the Rashomon tonight, and watch there alone? Yes, answered Suna. I will go, and, if needs be alone, although I think one of you might bear me company. But one and all protested that, though fair fight and honourable foe they feared not, yet the ogres they could not, and would not face. Then up rose Suna, and at once began to prepare for his expedition. How can we be sure that you really go to the Rashomon? Asked his companions. What sign will you give us? You know the notice board which stands just outside the castle gate, replied Suna. A new notice was posted upon it this very day. Well, if I carry the board, notice, and all, and plant it down by the Rashomon where all may see it tomorrow morning, will that satisfy you, since my word of honour does not? They all cried out that this would satisfy them, and bade him good speed. That very same night, mounting his horse, and taking the notice board with him, Suna rode alone to the Rashomon, and there awaited if the coming of the enemy indeed there were. To the Rashomon, and there awaited if the coming of the enemy indeed there were. Not a soul stirred abroad or passed through the gateway, for all were in terror of the ogres. Furthermore the night was windy and rainy, and so dark that it was impossible to see a yard before you. Undaunted, the brave warrior kept his dread and lonely watch, and yet no creature came. The night was almost over, dawn was near, the storm had broken out afresh, when a hand put forth from the roof of the gateway, clutched Suna's head. There, above him, stood an ogre. Of fearful aspect, his horrible head armed with a pair of copper-collared horns. With his strong and bony hand he still grasped Suna's head and tried to lift him onto the roof. Surprised and horror-stricken, Suna was fain to confess to himself that this must indeed be Shitendoji, whose very existence he had doubted. This was no time for thought, however, and Suna at once laid hold of the ogre and tried to pull him down. Then a fierce struggle began. But Suna, being no match for the ogre in strength, would assuredly have been lifted from the ground, had he not succeeded in freeing one hand from the ogre's grasp. With this hand he drew his sword, and dealt one valiant blow at the ogre's arm. The arm fell, severed at the shoulder, and the ogre fled with a hideous yell. As all search for the monster was in vain, Suna at length took up the arm, and returned with it to Reiko's castle. Next morning Suna, accompanied by his friends, went to consult a famous wizard named Seimi as to what should be done with Shuten-Doji's arm. Seimi advised that it should be placed in a strong stone chest, and watched by Suna night and day, for 7 days. But, said Seimi to Suna, you must purify yourself by much fasting and prayer, and spend those 7 days in holy contemplation, holding converse with none. Unless you faithfully carry out my directions, I foresee that misfortune will surely follow. Suna therefore caused a strong stone chest to be prepared, placed the ogre's arm within it, and, having purified himself by fasting and prayer, sat down alone to watch it. The doors were shut, and all visitors refused admittance. Alone and wrapped in holy contemplation, Suna kept watch and ward. One night, when the 7 days and nights were almost accomplished, came a knocking at the gate. Who is there? Called out Suna. It is your old aunt from the country, answered a cracked and feeble voice. Play open the door. Suna answered, I am under a vow to hold converse with none until 7 days be past. I cannot open the door even to my aunt. I know that, returned the voice, but I have come a long way on purpose to see you. I am footsore and weary, surely you will not turn me away. Suna still refused for some time, but at last he allowed himself to be persuaded to open the door. I have heard of your noble exploit, said the old woman as she came in, and I have come all this long way to tell you how proud I am of my brave nephew. And where is the ogre's arm now? She continued, when Suna had thanked her for her kindness in coming to see him. The arm is in this stone case, said he. Is it indeed now? Well, would you believe it, although I have lived all these years, yet I have never in my life seen such a thing. Let me pray have one little peep at it. I am sorry, answered Suna, but my vow forbids my opening the case, or showing the arm to anyone, even for a moment, until the 7 days are past. At this the old woman burst into bitter tears, refusing to be comforted. Thereupon Suna, who was a soft-hearted young warrior, could withstand her no longer. "Just one look then," said he, and lifted the lid of the chest. The pretended aunt took up the arm, and seemed to be gazing at it in a kind of rapture, when, suddenly appearing in her true shape, which was none other than that of the ogre Shutendoji, she shouted, "My arm is my own again," and immediately vanished through a hole in the roof. Suna, quickly recovering from his surprise, rushed out, but not a trace of the ogre was to be found. Sad and crestfallen, the warrior bent his steps to the house of Reiko, and told him all that had happened. Reiko called his followers round him, and they there and then solemnly vowed that they would one day destroy the ogres in their stronghold of Oyuyama, or perish in the attempt.